Good morning, everyone. This is Sherry Sanderson, the library director here at the Boulder Junction Public Library. I want to welcome everybody who can join us today and thank you for coming. I am proud to say that we had Mary Anne here for a second time, and we're very gracious that she not only came for a second time, but she's also going to be recording this program today so that we can share it on our YouTube page. And people that could not make it today can still watch it on our YouTube page. This is the last of our summer author series, and we will be going into fall programming soon. There is nothing scheduled right now, but if you want to watch our Facebook page and our website, any programming that we add will be put up on our Facebook page and our website. I'm also looking for new ideas for programs. In the fall and the winter, we go back to doing more of our naturalist programs, travel logs, health and wellness talks. So if you know of anybody that can come and talk about something that they have as a special hobby or a talent that they have, please get in touch with me here at the library. And today I would like to acknowledge that we are speaking to you from the lands of the Anishinaabe or Ojibwe Indigenous people of Wisconsin. These lands were ceded to the U.S. government in the treaties of 1836, 1837, 1842, and 1854. These lands are now the location of 6 federally recognized Ojibwe tribes, where they exercise treaty rights to hunt, fish, and gather in ceded territories. Nearest to us is the federally recognized tribal community of Lac du Flambeau Band of Lake Superior Chippewa Indians. The Boulder Junction Public Library would like to acknowledge the historical and contemporary relationships with the Ojibwe people, descendants, and members from other tribes living in our area, as well as our diverse communities here. We would like to recognize and support the resilience and strength of Indigenous people. We express our gratitude for the homelands we reside on and for the opportunity to gain knowledge from and collaborate with First Nations people in Wisconsin. And now I am honored to introduce Mary Anne. She's a local Boulder Junction author and avid kayaker who uses insights gained on the water to enrich her own life and the lives of others. She finds depth and meaning in her life from the solitude of kayaking and spending time in the restorative sanctuary of the natural world. In her books, she offers insights on how lessons learned on the water help us to navigate the uncharted waters of life. Paddlin with Thoreau is Mary Anne's 4th book in the Reflections from the Red Kayak series. As a result of her discovery of her own healing on the water, she founded and guided the Red Kayak Institute from 2012 to 2019, leading kayak retreats for cancer survivors, caregivers, fundraising retreats for local scholarship funds, retreats for women in 12-step programs, and writers' workshops, and more. Today, Mary Anne offers her individual services as a kayaking retreat facilitator in collaboration with other nonprofit groups and organizations. And today, Mary Anne is very generous and giving 100% of the proceeds from the sale of her books to the Boulder Junction Public Library. So I'm honored to introduce our guest, Mary Anne.
Thank you, Sherry, for that beautiful introduction. It is always an honor and a privilege to participate here in the Boulder Junction series of authors this summer. Sherry had put together just a wonderful lineup of naturalist authors, and I am honored and humbled to be proud of such a prestigious group of Northwoods and award-winning authors, such as Jeff Wilson, Emily Stone, Jeff Nania, Joe Hovel, John Bates, Mary Burns, Nick Vanderpooy, many of these authors that gave talks across the summer. And at the beginning of the summer, I made a commitment to attend each and every one of these presentations to support the Summer Author Series. And I was amazed at the beautiful thread of nature that was woven through the tapestry of this series. Everyone speaking about the importance of nature, land conservation, water preservation, and what so many people are doing to help get water to places that do not have enough water, and just so many connections to nature, and also, most importantly, talking about the future and how it is our responsibility to make sure that all of the things that we love about nature are here for the future generations to come. So thank you again, Sherry, for all of the wonderful work that you do here at our Boulder Junction Library. So without further ado, let me begin my presentation and share my thoughts and insights with you as we paddle with Thoreau here on the Reflections from the Red Kayak series. Happy birthday. Well, no, it's not actually my birthday, but the story of me and my little red kayak begins here. Back a number of years ago, I had wanted to try kayaking, and I wanted to get out there and get on the water in the peacefulness and the calm of what I thought paddling would be. So back many years ago, a number of friends of mine and my family pitched in, and they bought me this little red kayak for my birthday. One day, I came home from work, opened my overhead garage door, and there she was, sitting on the floor, just like this, little red kayak with a big bow right on the front of it. Happy birthday to me, and I call her the gift that keeps on giving. This year, Little Red and I, as I affectionately call her, began our 28th year on the water together. And through that time, we have spent many, many occasions on all different sorts of waters. But the very first time I took her out, I went up to my place in Wisconsin, and my neighbors had told me at that point in time that if I went directly across the lake into this little inlet that went around this island and came back out across the lake, it would be a really beautiful paddle. So I get in my kayak. I have no idea what I'm doing. I just get in my kayak, I start to paddle, and I go across the lake as fast as I can. I come to this little inlet. I zoom around inside the inlet, go around the island, come back out across the lake, and get back to shore. Some friends of mine were up there with me at that point in time, and they said, well, tell me, how was it? What was it like to be out in that inlet? I said, oh my gosh, it was beautiful back there. It was really pretty. They said, well, did you see any wildlife back there? I said, oh, yeah. I saw birds, and there was a heron taking off. And they said, well, did you see any flowers or any foliage? I said, oh, yeah. There was evergreen trees back in there, and there was reeds and cattails. And then I stopped, and I thought, wait a minute. All you have done is taken your busy, hectic land life and put it on the water. This is not the peacefulness and the calm that you had wanted when you wanted to try kayaking. So from that point on, every morning when I went out in my little red kayak, I took my dark roast coffee, my chocolate peanut butter protein bar, I love chocolate, and my camera and my journal, and I began to experience the calmness and peacefulness of kayaking. And along the way, I started to journal different thoughts because I started to realize that there were so many analogies between kayaking and life. Things like balance and focus and clarity. And so I began my journey of journaling many thoughts, hoping to someday put them together in a little book that not only I would share my insights with everyone, but also provide blank pages in there for the reader's own journaling and perhaps sketching as well. So through that period of time, once I started kayaking, I wrote 3 books, which became part of the Reflections from the Red Kayak series. Reflections from the Red Kayak, Thoughts on Life, A Season on the Water, and Change, Our Ever-Present Companion. And each of these books is a little bit different focus, but they are all thoughts on life and what I garnered from my time in Little Red on the water. And then I went through a period of time in my life. You know how sometimes you go through this period of time where you have a lot of loss and a lot of heartache that is compressed in a very short period of time. Well, I went through one of these periods of my life, and I found a great deal of healing on the water, kayaking solo, and just spending contemplative time on the water in nature. And I thought to myself, if this could be very healing for me, I'm certain that it could possibly be healing for other people. And that is when I began the Red Kayak Institute. I gathered up a bunch of my paddling buddies and I said, okay, we're going to do this. We are going to take people who are facing life's challenges out on the water for a half-day retreat, have them paddle for a few hours in silence, and see if they can find some slices of healing. So for 8 years, we had an amazing run, as Sherry had mentioned earlier in my introduction, of taking different groups out on the water, helping them to reclaim themselves, as was our tagline, by spending healing time in silence, and having a little journal of their own to work with while they were out on the water. And so we disbanded the Red Kayak Institute in 2019. We ended up with 8 great years of taking people out on the water and doing a lot of great work. Throughout this whole period of time, Henry David Thoreau's thoughts and insights and wisdom was a thread throughout my book. Many quotes of his are in all of my books. I used some of his learnings and teachings in the Red Kayak Institute. And so I had decided, well, now I'd like to devote an entire book to Thoreau and bring some of his lesser known quotes to the forefront and ponder them and take them with me out on the water. So I thought, okay, what do I need to do here now to get started? Well, first of all, I need a Thoreau desk. Enter Richard from Boxborough, Massachusetts, who has his own woodworking company. I found him online. He makes exact replicas of Thoreau's desk, and so he made one and sent it to me, complete with the broken piece in the back of the desk and the worn out keyhole in the front. Every desk then needs a chair. Enter my next door neighbor, Julie. I was over at Julie and Don's house one day, and Julie says to me, I would love to give you something to help you along with the writing of your new book. What can I give you? So I pointed to the corner of her house and I said, I would like that chair that's in the corner of your house. And so Julie smiled and said, sure, it's yours. She and Don graciously gave me this chair from their house to complete my Thoreau desk and chair combo. Who gives you furniture from their house? Great neighbors like Julie and Don do. And then finally, to complete my Thoreau writing space, here is my Thoreau library. Books written by him and about him that I read through and studied and pondered through the 3.5 years that I was completing this publication, and along with the wooden carvings of some of the words that go along with Thoreau, Simplify and Walden and Thoreau himself, that Richard also carved and gave to me when I got my desk from him at his workshop. So all of this sits on the bookcase in my writing space, and so now I am ready to go. So what I'm going to do now in this talk is take you through back to the past, gaining some perspective from the past, taking a look at Thoreau's life, at the events that were happening during that time, bringing you then to the present moment and my book and my essays and my saunterings in New England in Thoreau's territory. And then finally, the future, and what is my hope for the future, and how we need to think about things for the next generations going forward. So a little perspective from the past here. This is a picture of an old stone bridge built in 1883 that goes over the Sudbury River, where Thoreau's family lived. David Henry Thoreau, yes, David Henry, that was his legal name, was born on July 12th, 1817, over 200 years ago in Concord, Massachusetts. During the course of Thoreau's life, he spent his early years growing up in Concord, Massachusetts. Around that time, the U.S. Census was about 10 million people. 1.5 million of them were slaves. The issue of slavery was very prominent at that time. States were coming into the Union either as free states or slave states. In 1830, Congress actually passed an Indian removal bill, forcibly removing Native Americans west of the Mississippi River. Why? Because they wanted the land. In 1837, Thoreau graduated from Harvard. Emerson gave his address at his graduating class, and Thoreau read Emerson's essay called Nature, and it had a very, very profound effect on him. So profound that he then, at that point, changed his name to Henry David, and he was 20 years old. Don't know that he ever legally changed his name, but he went by Henry David and was called that for the remainder of his life. At that time also, the Underground Railroad was established, and Henry takes a teaching job at a Concord public school. He works at this public school for 2 weeks, and then he quits. Why did he quit? Because the school was requiring him to enforce corporal punishment, and he did not believe in administering that to the students, and so he quit his job. Shortly thereafter, he and his brother John open a private school. The private school was all nature-based, and in addition to their academic classes, the students spent a great deal of time out in nature, learning and experiencing the benefits of being in the wilderness. And also at that time, when Thoreau was 22, 23 years old, he and his brother John took a 2-week river trip on the Concord and Merrimack rivers. At this time also, we are always also expanding as a country. The first wagon train is going to the Oregon Territory. The California Gold Rush is going on. And then a few years later, they closed their school due to John's poor health. John was shaving one morning and cut his jaw, and John died of lockjaw a few days later in Henry's arms. Henry was 24 years old. That event had a very, very profound effect on Henry and his life. From 1845 to 1847, Thoreau spent time at Walden Pond. It's easily to remember how long he was there. It's 2 years, 2 months, and 2 days. During that time, he would also often go into town, and at one point in time, he got arrested and spent some time in jail. Why did he get arrested? Because he failed to pay a poll tax, and he failed to pay this poll tax because he felt that it was going to support the ongoing slavery as well as supporting the Mexican-American War, which was taking place at that time. Someone paid his poll tax, and he got out of jail after spending a night there, and he was not very happy about that. He was very much a man of principle. In 1848, Wisconsin enters the Union as the 30th state. We enter as a free state, and Thoreau begins his publishing career, publishing a week on the Concord and Merrimack rivers at his age 30. He then publishes Civil Disobedience, and Civil Disobedience became the framework and a platform for such prolific nonviolent movement leaders such as Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr. A number of years later, he published Walden, and during that entire time, he is lecturing throughout New England. He visits Maine and Cape Cod numerous times, and in 1859, Thoreau's father dies, and Henry takes over running the pencil factory. The Thoreau family had a pencil factory that produced the highest quality of pencils at that time, and it's one of the reasons why I included a number of pencil sketches in my book to honor their pencil factory. Around that time now also, the U.S. Census has tripled to 31 million people, 4 million of them slaves, and now half of our population is now living west of the Appalachian Mountains. In 1860, Abraham Lincoln is elected. 6 weeks later, South Carolina secedes from the Union, and then it was immediately followed by 10 other southern states. And then, of course, for the next 4 years, the Civil War tears our nation apart. One of the interesting things that I did not know until I was researching this was it was only 5 days after the Civil War ended that Lincoln was assassinated. Pro-slavery man John Wilkes Booth taking his life. In 1861, Thoreau visits the Midwest on his doctor's advice. Thoreau had struggled with tuberculosis for a number of years, and the doctor felt that perhaps the air here in the Midwest would be better for him. And so he came across northern Illinois into Galena, up the Mississippi River to Minneapolis, Minnesota, back down the Mississippi to Prairie du Chien, and then he took the railroad along the lower Wisconsin River back to Milwaukee and back to New England. He was here for 2 months, and unfortunately for Thoreau, the Midwest was not the healing balm that his doctors had hoped it would be, and he died on May 6th in 1862 at the age of 44. He looks rather old for 44 years old here in this picture. During the course of his life then, there was economic development, there was expansion, there was progress, and there was growth. There was also deforestation, dam building disputes, social injustice, and war. And so I ask you this question: what has fundamentally changed? And why do Thoreau's universal messages still resonate today? I think that some of this insight that was so prevalent for Thoreau from Ralph Waldo Emerson's essay on nature is this: the reason why the world lacks unity and lies broken and in heaps is because man is disunited with himself. Thoreau was part of a group of people that I call the non-conforming transcendentalists. Much of the transcendentalist movement was based on Emerson's essay, Nature. Nature always wears the color of the spirit. Thoreau became then a leader in transcendentalism, and it was the liveliest intellectual movement of the 19th century. The transcendentalists believed in these things: divinity in nature combined with simplistic living. People and nature were filled with goodness. People were at their best when they were independent and self-reliant, not in a selfish way, but if the individuals were whole, the transcendentalists believed that they would become better members of society. They believed in the following social changes: race and gender equality, the importance of education for women, and the abolition of slavery. So you can see, when you look at all of the events and all of the things that were taking place during this time, why these transcendentalists were non-conforming. Their thinking was not the most popular in going in the flow of all of the events and the movements of that time. Which brings us now to the present. So when this book began, my dear friend Ann Moss, who is one of the most incredibly creative people that I know, designed the cover for me. She took a look back into the past at the original cover of Walden, or Life in the Woods, as it was called back then, and fashioned the cover of this book with the same look and the same typeface that was used on that publication over 200 years ago. The bridge in the background is here. It's called the Lumberjack Bridge, and it's symbolic in its reference to bridging the past, crossing over that bridge into the present moment, and garnering some of Thoreau's wisdom here today. The kayak on the left represents Thoreau, black and white. The kayak on the right represents me, my little red kayak, and our paddles are crossed together, connecting our thoughts and connecting some of the meaning. It's important always for me to lead with meaning. The book is dedicated to my mom, age 93, and my great niece, Bianca, age 1. They're double rainbow there. They are a beautiful arc. One end, timeless wisdom. The other end, hope and promise for the future. The book is all about connections and bridges and arcs and rainbows. The opening quote of the book says, "Could a greater miracle take place than for us to look at each other, look through each other's eyes for an instant?" And I had a copy of Thoreau's book on my desk, which is called A Light in the Woods, which includes many of his quotes. And his picture is on the front of this book. So every morning when I sat down to write at his desk, I would look at his picture and I would kind of talk to him a little bit. And I would say, okay, Henry, what do you think today? What essay do you think maybe we'll work on? What thoughts and insights should we try to convey this morning with our writing? And so I decided, by looking through his eyes into our present day and into the future, that I would do two things. I would immerse myself in his life, spending time in New England, sauntering around at the places that he was, and also to read many of his works, not only the books that he wrote, but books that others wrote about him. So let's take a little journey with Henry and I into his precious New England territory. He was born in Concord, Massachusetts, which is west of Boston there in Massachusetts. He spent time there out on Cape Cod, and he also went up into New Hampshire, hiked some of the mountains there, paddled up there to Concord, New Hampshire with his brother John, and they spent an extra week there hiking into the White Mountains. And he also spent a great deal of time in Maine. His first solo seafaring journey was up the coast of Maine, and he spent a great deal of time up in the north woods of Maine at Moosehead Lake and many of the lakes and rivers up there with his Indian guide, Joe Paulus. So I was also privileged to be able to spend some time there in Maine. So I sauntered on his paths where he was grounded in his own truths. There's no better place to start than iconic Walden Pond. Here I am standing in the doorway of the replica of his cabin. His cabin is positioned at the very edge of the parking lot at the visitor center there at Walden Pond. Certainly not the spot where Henry built his cabin, but it's a place where if people cannot hike the path around Walden Pond, they certainly can get to see his cabin there. And so inside his cabin, he had a wood stove, a bed, a table, a desk, and 3 chairs, one for solitude, one for friendship, and 2 for friendship, and 3 for society, as he would say. His cabin and the original site of his 10-foot by 15-foot cabin is marked here with granite pillars. It is a very sacred experience and was for me to step into this space and think that I was actually standing on the ground where he did build his cabin. Emerson owned this property and let Thoreau build this cabin there. This is the view of his cove from his cabin, and I hiked around Walden Pond on what is called the Heart Healthy Trail. And as I was walking around the pond, I thought, did he step here? Did he see this tree? Did he sit on this log? It was a very fun experience to saunter around this pond. Walden Pond is not very big. It's only 61 acres, but it's 100 feet deep. And Thoreau did a lot of research here at Walden Pond. Water quality, depth of water, what was happening on the pond with the changing seasons. And thankfully for his detailed research, it is being used today as a baseline by many researchers as they monitor and evaluate climate change. So Thoreau did not go to Walden Pond to escape society. He went, in his own words, to live in the woods deliberately, to find the meaning of life and to find his answers there. And he would not want us to imitate what he did. He would want us to find our answers on our own. So I, fortunately, is able to find my answers here at this sweet little cabin called Camp 19, owned by my dear friends, Sandy and Parker. And I affectionately call this my Walden without the pond because it's back on some acreage of their property. And they were gracious enough to allow me to spend a night there at the cabin to really try to embrace a little bit the full Walden experience of life in the woods. I also sauntered on Thoreau's path on Brister's Hill, which is very near Walden Pond. Brister Freeman was a slave. He was born into slavery, and the only way he could get out of slavery was to join American forces in the Revolutionary War. So he did that, and after 30 some odd years of being in slavery, he was free, and then he was allowed to own some property. So he owned this property outside of Walden Pond, and Thoreau hiked that property many, many times and did a lot of research in the forest there. Now, when you walk his path on Brister's Hill, there are granite slabs there all along the way with quotes from Thoreau's many books and many of his writings from his journal. I also paddled his waters and visited the shores where the flow of his rivers preserved his own true course. This is the confluence at Egg Rock in Concord, Massachusetts. I kayaked here one day, and I was able to paddle up and down the rivers that Thoreau lived near and by and paddled so often himself. Egg Rock is at the confluence of these three rivers, the Concord, the Sudbury, and the Assabet. Thoreau and Emerson spent a lot of time sitting on this Egg Rock, discussing their transcendentalist theories and life and all of the events that were taking place for them back in their time. So I first went to the right and paddled up the Assabet River. When Thoreau really wanted to get away from society and be in an area that was more primitive and wild, he went up the Assabet River. And this is the scene of the leaning hemlocks that he refers to in his writing. I then came back and paddled to the confluence, and I went to the right again down the Sudbury River where Thoreau lived. And so we stopped here in front of Thoreau's house. It was right about lunchtime, and we thought, well, we're going to have lunch here at in front of Thoreau's house. And so we back up into the reeds on the other side of the river, and we're having lunch. And I kind of feel like I'm sort of stalking this property a little bit, like I'm just sitting here kind of staring at it and just thinking back to Thoreau's time. What was he thinking about as he walked down from his house to the edge of this river? And it was kind of fun to just sit there and think back to the many, many, many times that he had done that. And after Thoreau's family lived here, Louisa May Alcott's family bought the house. Over the years then, up until today's time, the house had been expanded upon often. And in 2019, this over 5,000 square foot house sold for $2.6 million. So we then paddled back to the confluence at Egg Rock and went to the right again and turned down onto the Concord River. Concord River, a little bit more history there, a little bit more of buildings. And this is North Bridge that goes over the Concord River. This is this historic site of the start of the Revolutionary War. Young America fighting for their independence from England. This is where the infamous shot heard round the world took place. And with the help of Spain, France, and the Netherlands, the United States, young United States, won the war here. I also did a lot of sauntering around Cape Cod and went to the Highland Lighthouse in North Truro, Massachusetts, just north of the Little Elbow area on Cape Cod, and spent some time there. This was a place where Henry stayed when he visited Cape Cod. And when I went to the Cape Cod National Seashore Center, I asked them if there were any paths that Thoreau had walked here on Cape Cod that still existed today. And they said, no, most of them have been washed away and swallowed up now by the sea. And when Thoreau was there at the Highland Lighthouse, he did have conversations with the lighthouse keeper there. And the lighthouse keeper was concerned about the erosion that was taking place on the shores there. And he was concerned about how long this lighthouse might be able to be there without being swallowed up by the sea. And this Highland Lighthouse is the oldest and the tallest lighthouse on Cape Cod. And we went to the top of the lighthouse. And along the shoreline here, there were many, many shipwrecks that took place here at the shores of Cape Cod. And when you go to the top of the lighthouse, the docent showed us a map of all of these different shipwrecks that took place along the shores here. And it is quite a daunting visual. The little granite boulder that you see there has a plaque on it in that yellow rectangle, and it shows you where the original site of the lighthouse was. In 1996, they decided to move the lighthouse back 453 feet. It took them 6 months to complete the move, and it cost them $1.5 million. But that little yellow rectangle shows you the spot of the original lighthouse, which just beyond those little bushes there is complete erosion of the shoreline. So that lighthouse keeper was actually correct. That lighthouse would not have been able to stand the test of time in its original location. I also, in my journeying out to New England, summited his mountains where he elevated himself to a higher purpose. And so I summited his mountains in Massachusetts and in New Hampshire and in Maine. And the best one was this one, Mount Katahdin, which is the highest mountain in Maine, in the North Woods there. 5,269 feet high. And so we hiked this mountain one June day. Temperature was 36 degrees in the morning. It was about 56 degrees when we got to the summit. Perfect day for hiking. Thoreau attempted this hike up Mount Katahdin a couple of times, but never was able to reach the summit because of inclement weather. We are now at the Chimney Pond campground where this picture is taken. We have already hiked 3.3 miles up this mountain, and it certainly was not the smooth path that you see there walking through the campground. We are scrambling on boulders, stepping up and down boulders, hiking around bouldered paths, and it certainly was not a walk in the park, and we still had about 2.5 miles to go from this vantage point here at Chimney Pond Campground. When you get close to the summit, there's an area there called the Tablelands. Any YouTube video that I watched prior to this hike, the people said, when you get to the Tablelands and you're only about a mile or so from the summit, it levels out and it's relatively flat. You still have some elevation to go, but it's a relatively flat hike. If you could see the look on my face as I'm standing here in the Tablelands, I'm thinking, no, not so much. This is not so flat. It's not so easy. It's not so level. We are still scrambling over all of these boulders. And in the book, The Maine Woods, Thoreau writes about an area hiking up and attempting the summit where he felt it rained rocks. And I think this was the area that he was certainly talking about. We eventually reach the summit of Mount Katahdin and get our picture taking around this weather-worn sign where everyone gets their picture taken. Mount Katahdin is also the terminus, the north terminus of the Appalachian Trail. There was actually a woman there who was starting her hike on the AT when we were there. And it took us 12 hours to do this hike, 6 hours up and 6 hours down. Fabulous, fabulous day. And the following week, it snowed up here on Mount Katahdin. So we were very, very blessed on our journey. What is this, you might ask? Well, anywhere you go in New England, there is a Thoreau something. a Thoreau path, a Thoreau trail, Thoreau bogs, Thoreau bridge. There's something everywhere Thoreau. So I thought to myself, okay, since Thoreau came to the Midwest and spent some time here, there has to be something here in the Midwest, a Thoreau something. I'm sure I will find something. Lo and behold, don't I find Thoreau College. Tucked away in the driftless region in the southwestern portion of Wisconsin, in the town of Viroqua, is this building, which is the main building of the Thoreau College campus. I think Henry would have absolutely loved that this is his college, and this is this building. And so I contact Jacob Hunt, who is the executive director of Thoreau College, and I tell him about my project, writing this book, and he invites me to come down and meet him in November of 2022. So I meet with him, we have a fabulous conversation, and he says to me, what I'd like to do is, would you be able to come back in the spring when we're starting a new semester, do a presentation to the students, and then take the students paddling the next day on the Kickapoo River? I am in. So I said, yes, I'd be more than happy to do that. And he says to me, by the way, will your book be completed by then? And I said, Jacob, you have just given me the inspiration to complete my book. And so this college is part of a micro-college movement across the United States and internationally. These micro-colleges only allow about 15 to 25 students per semester, and the colleges are very involved in their communities, and they live within the communities, and they immerse themselves in the folklore and the culture of these communities. And I believe they truly resonate with this quote from Walden that Henry wrote. It is time that we had uncommon schools, that we did not leave off our education when we begin to be men and women. It is time that villages were universities. And I truly believe that is the essence of Thoreau College. So when I left and I assured Jacob that I would have my book done, he said, great, we will do the book launch here at Thoreau College for you when you come back in spring. So in May of 2023, books in hand, I go back to Thoreau College and I do my book launch. And here is the notification on the building of my book launch. I love it. Handwritten, affixed to the side of the building with painter's tape, come to my book launch. And it was terrific. Terrific night with the students and some people from the community. The following day, we paddled the Kickapoo River, and it was just a delightful experience. I think I learned more from these students than they learned from me. So I then, as the second part of my Thoreau journey, after immersing myself in his area in New England and also here in the Midwest, I immersed myself in his books. So the first book I took upon was A Week on the Concord and Merrimack Rivers, and Thoreau paddled from the bottom left area. You can see where Concord, Massachusetts is, where the Concord River is, and he and his brother John paddle all the way up to the Merrimack and then up to Concord, New Hampshire, and spend a week in the White Mountains and then paddle back down. So even though the book is called A Week on the Concord and Merrimack Rivers, they actually did spend 2 weeks on this journey. So Thoreau was 30 when he published this book. This is the river journey with his brother John when he was 22 years old. Interestingly, he never mentions his brother John by name. I think the loss of his brother John and how he died was such a huge heartache for Henry that he could not even bring to mention his brother by name in the book. It was written about 5 or 6 years after John died, and it really is a reflection, the voyage of a reflection, so to speak. He goes a lot into many things in the past, reflects back into the present, and it's kind of a journey and a voyage back and forth. He wrote this at the same time he was writing Walden at Walden Pond, and he paid for the first 1,000 copies that were printed. After about 7 or 8 years, Only 294 copies were sold, and his publisher contacted him and said, hey, you got to come and pick up the rest of these copies. These books are just not selling. So Thoreau, being a person who had a little bit of a sense of humor, picked up the books, and he said, I have now a library of nearly 900 volumes, over which 700 I wrote myself. At his age of 37, he published Walden. He wrote 8 handwritten drafts of this book, if you can believe that, before it was published. And it was published about 7 years after he left Walden Pond. And again, the demand was only about 300 copies over the next 15 years. It's a challenge to be a writer. And today, of course, there are over 1,000 editions of this book that have been printed, and certainly it is considered one of the great American classics. These are the only 2 books that were published during Henry's lifetime. Everything else that was published was done posthumously. The other 3 books that I used to pull his quotes from were put together by his sister Sophia and his traveling companion Ellery Channing. And these are The Maine Woods, Cape Cod, and that beautiful container of his wisdom, his journal. So I will take you now through a few of my essays in the book. The essays are meant to be contemplative. They're meant to bring Henry's wisdom forward into today. And then I would take his quotes and his thoughts out on the water with me and paddle and see what might surface for me in today's world. So the first essay I want to share with you is called Reverence. All wisdom is the reward of a discipline, conscious or unconscious. Cultivate reverence. And he wrote this when he was 34 in his journal. I love the picture that I took of the water lily along the way. The water lilies just seem to be very reverent for me. I title my portion of the essay, What is Sacred to You? So at this time of Henry's journal entries, he is pointing us in a little bit more reverent direction. He notes that small weeds look more beautiful with raindrops on them. He refers to a dandelion in the grass as a little burst of sunshine. His writing, fresh and adorned, almost spirited away in a robe of dewdrops, has almost a little bit of a spiritual reflection to it. And he writes, devote your life to the discovery of the divinity in nature. So I'm out on a sacred Sunday morning paddle. I call it a sacred Sunday morning paddle because for some reason to me, it seems as though paddling on a Sunday morning is just a little bit more quiet than other times that I'm on the rivers and the lakes. There just seems to be an extra layer, an extra veil of calmness and peacefulness on the water. And I'm thinking about what is sacred that is different for all of us. Each of us has our own things that are sacred to us, don't we? Our family, our friends, perhaps our career, perhaps what we're doing, giving our life meaningful purpose. But whatever it is, for each of us, it's very sacred. And we hold it in our trembling hands because it's very fragile. And we would do anything for it because it is so sacred to us. What is universal in our sacredness is that we protect, cherish, and love what is sacred to us. We will do anything for it. What is common for all of us is our home here on earth and nature. We are all spinning around on this planet together, and everything impacts each one of us. It is our common home. In the 1980s, John Hay wrote a great book called Immortal Wilderness. I don't remember a lot of what was written in that book, but these 7 words were the most profound to me that he wrote in the book. And he wrote, when nothing is sacred, nothing is safe. And unfortunately, I think that is so prevalent for us today. We don't feel safe much anymore. And I wonder if it's because we're not holding as much things as sacred as we should be. I close the essay in the words of Henry: pursue some path, however narrow and crooked, in which you can walk with love and reverence. We must walk this way as if our lives depend on it, because it does. The next essay I'd like to share with you is titled Seeds, in the first part of the essay where I share Henry's story. So this is a picture of me walking along the shores of Cape Cod. I think I'm looking for seeds, but actually I'm watching my footprints in the sand as I take a step, and then I look behind me and I watch the foamy surf come up and wash my footprint away. And I think to myself, what lasting impression am I leaving here on this earth? What lasting blessings am I leaving? And in this portion of this essay, this quote, Henry is on Cape Cod, and he writes, vessels with seeds in their cargoes, destined for particular ports where perhaps they were not needed, have been cast away on desolate islands, and though some of their crews perished, some of their seeds have been preserved. So I title my portion of this essay, Lasting Blessings. Henry's at the Highland Lighthouse. He's walking along the shores of Cape Cod, and he is seeing non-native things growing there: beets, carrots, turnips. And his thoughts drift back to the shipwreck Franklin. And the shipwreck Franklin was bound for Boston, and it carried a gentleman by the name of Mr. Bell. Mr. Bell was hoping to establish a nursery in Boston, and he had many barrels of different types of seeds on the boat with him. When the Franklin ran aground, all of these barrels of seeds ended up on the shore and broke open. And Henry comments, and did not a nursery get established, though he thought he had failed? And so I think about our lives, and I think about that we have good seeds of love and kindness and compassion, and we also have bad seeds of fear and greed and divisiveness. We can spread these seeds on fertile soil or degenerated soil. We don't know where the seeds are going to fall. But like a seed in the ground, which is tiny as it begins its journey in the darkness, it is fragile as it pushes its way up through the dirt. It is alive in the sunlight and the moisture of the rain, and it is fulfilled as it blossoms and flourishes. We too have our seeds. They begin as thoughts in the safe garden of our minds. Our sprouts of words give voice, and our voice and our words lead to action, and our action is then manifested throughout the world. So I ask you this question: are we sowing wisely? I close this chapter by saying, let us have great faith in the seeds we sow. Let us be patient and diligent as we cultivate the delicate seeds of all that is good. Let us expect the lasting blessings of the miracle of a seed. Trust the journey. The final essay I want to share with you is from his journal, which he wrote for 24 years, roughly 7,000 pages and 2 million words. And his first entry into his journal at this time writes, "What are you doing now?" Emerson asks him. "Do you keep a journal?" "So I make my first entry today." Thoreau was 20 years old. Later on, he writes in his journal, "My journal should be the record of my love. I would write in it only of the things I love, my affection for any aspect of the world, what I love to think of." And after taking 3 years to read through his journal, I believe that it was. So let's go to the moon. This is a picture of my kayak tethered to the reflection of the moonlight on the water. In his journal at age 34, Henry writes, "To devote your life to the divinity in nature or to the eating of oysters, would they not be attended to with different results? If the wine, the water which nourishes me grows on the surface of the moon, I will do the best I can to go to the moon for it." I title my section of the essay, "Reach and Soar." At this time in his journal, Henry is writing about the plenitude of life and giving us some advice there. He is encouraging us to live life to the fullest. He is saying in this journal entry that we only really live our lives half out. We don't go all the way. I think this is where he refers to most men lead lives of quiet desperation in one of his famous quotes. And he's encouraging us to probe the universe in myriad points. So as I'm kayaking out in the moonlight, I'm thinking back. When I was a little girl, I subscribed to Highlights magazine. Many of you may remember Highlights magazine, filled with fun activities. At the back of one of my issues, there was an opportunity to send in an application for a certificate to be one of the first people to ride on a rocket ship to the moon. I run to my mom. I say, "Mom, we have to fill this out. We have to send this in. I want to go to the moon." She rolls her eyes, but graciously pays for, I think, whatever it costs to send in for that certificate, and filled out the application, and I got my application to go to the moon. I am going to get there someday. 14 years later, I'm watching the Apollo 11 mission as Neil Armstrong takes his first steps on the moon, and I think to myself, my time is definitely coming. So as I'm kayaking in the moonlight, you feel a little bit insecure when you're out there because all of your familiar surroundings become indistinguishable. You don't really recognize the shoreline as well as you do in the daylight, which is why I tethered the tip of my kayak to the reflection of the moonlight on the water, thinking I kind of like to secure myself here a little bit. And at the time that I do that, I then feel two opposite emotions. I feel eternally connected to all things. And I also feel isolated from everything around me at the same time. It is as though the gravitational pull of the moon has heightened all of my senses and all of my awareness. And I think when we put ourselves in these uncomfortable situations or out of our comfort zone a little bit, they encourage us to expand and to grow a little bit. They stretch us, and then they encourage us to stretch ourselves. So the Artemis mission is the current lunar mission. Its purpose is to put a permanent base on the moon so that we can send people to the moon, and then from the moon, we would be able to launch people to Mars. Also, part of this Artemis mission, their purpose is to take the first person of color to the moon and also to take the first woman to the moon. I think to myself, I have no idea where that certificate is. But in 2021, NASA sent the Perseverance to Mars. We Earthlings had an opportunity to put our names on a computer chip that was going to be left on the surface of the red planet. So, of course, you know, I sent in and put my name on that computer chip. I received a digital boarding pass to Mars, and off I went. I bypassed the moon. I went right to Mars. In his journal, Henry wrote, "We believe that the possibility of the future far exceeds the accomplishments of the past." He would be amazed today. The Perseverance also carried something else to Mars, a message emblazoned on its parachute proclaiming, "Dare mighty things. Let us reach and soar and do the same." At the end of every essay, there's a series of questions for you to ponder. At the end of this essay, here are your questions. What one thing would you do if you were to reach and soar and dare mighty things? What is holding you back as you sit on your launch pad? How will it feel to blast off? Begin your countdown now. After the questions, there are a couple of blank pages. I did pencil sketches with the words from the wood carvings that Richard gave me. At the bottom of every journaling page is a pencil sketch that my dear friend Gail did for me of Thoreau's desk. And it sits quietly at the bottom of each of these pages so that you too can pretend that you are writing on Thoreau's desk. So in the parting thoughts, Henry writes, "The rarest quality in an epitaph is truth." Henry wrote this quote when he wrote the book, A Week on the Concord and Merrimack Rivers, which, as you recall, he was 22 years old when he did that river trip. I don't know about you, but when I was 22 years old, I was not thinking about an epitaph and the rarest quality of truth at that time, when I was 22 years old. Henry has always amazed me in his wisdom at such a young age. I had the opportunity to visit Henry's gravesite when I visited Sleepy Hollow Cemetery in Concord, Massachusetts. He sits in an area on the cemetery called Author's Ridge, and along with his family is also the Emersons, the Hawthornes, Louisa May Alcott's family. All of these prolific authors and their families have their places on this Author's Ridge. And I say, even his tombstone, tiny tombstone, casts a long shadow. Before he died, his Aunt Louisa asked him, she said, "Henry, have you made your peace with God?" Henry said, "I did not know we had ever quarreled." His final words were, "Now come good sailing, Indian and moose." He was a nature guy and a water guy until the very end. The town of Concord, which always kind of felt that Henry was kind of a peculiar guy, honored him at his death. They let all of the school children out of school to attend his funeral. The church bells rang 44 times, one for each year of his life, and they covered his casket with wildflowers. In his eulogy, Ralph Waldo Emerson said, "No truer American existed than Thoreau. The country knows not yet, or in the least part, how great a son it has lost." And I think we do know. We do know what a great son he was, because his lasting legacy is still with us today. So our experiences today, the research is showing us many things. For time in the woods and the importance of it, Canadian doctors can now write prescriptions for people to gain free access into their provincial parks. Japanese doctors are getting certified in forest medicine to help encourage people to get out into the woods and experience the benefits of being there. Much research and many books are being written about the water. Books like The Blue Mind, which actually scientifically and biologically researches and documents the health benefits of being on, in, or near the water, how your blood pressure drops, how your pulse rate slows. Hidden Messages in Water by Masaru Emoto, great book on the quality of water and how water can actually transmit feelings for us. And many experiences that are being researched in the mountains and other areas where people can go to experience wonder and awe. And what they are finding is that these experiences are helping to rewire people's brains. And they're finding great success with people who suffer from PTSD when they experience these wonder and awe of being in these places. And so what I think all of this research just validates what Thoreau knew all along. Which brings me to the future and The Last Child in the Woods. In 2005, Richard Louv wrote this book. It was all about how children are not getting enough time out in nature and the impact that it is having on them. And he coined a phrase called nature deficit disorder, which became part of an international movement to get children outside in nature more. In 2011, he wrote a book called The Nature Principle for adults because he was receiving so much information back from parents who were reading these books that they were feeling the same thing about not having enough time in nature. So our final bridge takes us to the future. This is called Thoreau's Bridge, and it's located in northwestern Connecticut. Henry had never been there, but there is a bridge there in his honor. So as I see this bridge, on one end of the trail is the past and the present moments that we have now experienced. On the other side of the bridge is the future. As you walk across this bridge, you can run your hands along the handrails and actually touch the inscriptions that are on the rails, because they are all of Thoreau's many quotes that are inscribed on the rails of this bridge. And so it's amazing to me, he was never here, and yet there is this beautiful bridge with his inscriptions guiding us to the future. So here is my roster of hope. These are names of children born into my family and families of people that I love over the recent years. I look at these names and I get a little choked up. These children personalize the future for me. They encourage me to do more, to make sure that nature is here for them just as it is for us today. And they're counting on us. How do I know that they're counting on us? Because their parents and grandparents have been sending me pictures of the children reading Paddlin with Thoreau. They're reading the book. They're looking. They want to know what's going on. What does Henry have to say? What is Mary Anne doing to bring his thoughts to the present moment? What's going to be my future? They want to know. So I'll share with you this story. A father and son were walking down a path in the woods, and they came upon two wolves who were fighting. And the son says to the father, "Father, why are they fighting?" And the father said, "Because one is evil and one is good." And the son said, "Which one will win?" And the father said, "The one we feed." So we always have a choice, don't we? In the arc of our lives, we have a choice. Is it love or is it fear? Do we open our hearts with unbounded generosity? Or do we close our hands in fists of greed? Do we live our lives with deep compassion? Or do we sit on the sidelines of indifference? Do we work toward unity? Or do we stay divided? Do we win? Or do we lose? I'd like to say here that we either all win or we all lose. We are all here on this planet together. Nature knows no boundaries. The smoke-filled skies that we experienced here in northern Wisconsin and across the United States this summer came down from Canada. We had no direct impact on causing those fires, even though we all participate in the changing climate, but we are all impacted by what was happening there. So we do have a choice, and we either all win or we all lose. And if we can all just move a little bit more towards the direction of love and generosity and compassion and unity, perhaps we can reach a tipping point where the scales will turn. We're human. We're not perfect. And we all live our lives somewhere in between this arc. But let's all try, I think, to move a little bit more towards love and generosity and compassion and unity. So now to summarize a little bit of HDT's life, you see, I'm calling him HDT after this journey with him and becoming friends with him. We all have nicknames for our good friends. So HDT and I have become good friends on our journey. And here's what he was all about, just to give us a reminder. He was deeply grounded in who he was and why he was here. Integrity was at the core of his being. He did not let mundane concerns stand in the way of truth. He understood his relationships, both physically and spiritually, inner and outer, and with himself, nature, and others. He lived simply, which brought clarity. He found divinity and his answers in nature, and he honored the truth of his journey. He had the courage to walk his talk. When you read through the book, the essays really are all connected. So if I take a look at the three that I shared with you, how do we cultivate reverence from within to honor what is sacred? What seeds of lasting blessings are within you? Can we reach to our depths within and soar to dare mighty things? See a little thread here. We're going within because I believe that is where all of our answers lie, and that's where we need to start. So some final thoughts for you. We are the environment, and the environment is us. We are all collectively part of the natural world. In order to effect change, the individual must be whole. And we can't fix anything unless we fix ourselves first. And it all goes way back to Emerson's quote in the Nature essay. The reason why the world lacks unity and lies broken and in heaps is because man is disunited with himself. The closing quote of the book, I must now walk when I can see the most water, as to the most living part of nature. This is the blood of the earth, and we see its blue arteries pulsing with new life now. Henry wrote this quote shortly before he died at the age of 42. And to me, it seems as though he has hope for us. He sees us with the blue arteries pulsing with new life. And even though he lived over 200 years before us, he is still ahead of us in his thinking. So Little Red and I, the gift that keeps on giving, we will keep paddling on to our uncharted waters, learning life's lessons along the way. Me and HDT, we will continue on this journey wherever this book takes us, and we will keep paddling on together as well. So I thank you all for being here today to listen to my presentation on Paddlin with Thoreau. There are so many people that you can thank along the way. You know, when you do a book like this or a creative project like this, it is never just you. You are just the conduit through which all of these things come. When you look at my book, there is over 45 acknowledgments in the back of this book, because it really takes everybody to put something like this together. People who sent me books along the way, people who gave me nudges of encouragement, people who helped me with the mechanics of putting the book together, people who didn't even know something that they said or sent to me that would give me a little motivational nudge that I needed at that time. Sherry, who was so graciously kind to allow me to be part of the Summer Author Series, to get the word out about my book. Our local coffee shop in town, the Boulder Junction Coffee Company, spreading the word on their Facebook pages, selling my books in their coffee shop, because my story about Snow, the Great Revealer, is part of my time of writing in January and writing about snow, which is actually water, that I did in their coffee shop that day. Dee Beckman, who accompanied me on all of my New England excursions. I would have never been able to do all of those excursions and get to all of those places if it weren't for her being with me on those treks. All of you being here, and so many, many people that helped me along the way. And of course, finally, to Henry for his timeless wisdom, his insights, and his hope for us for the future. So I thank you. As Sherry did mention, I have my books for sale here. All of the proceeds from the sale of all of my books today go towards the support of our Boulder Junction Library. Thank you, and keep paddling on.